Well, we enter our new week on statistics, and it's kind of an interesting subject to talk about. Some people call it sadistics. But anyway, it's July 9th through the 14th. A few things to talk about. So, action research and mixed methods research are two different research methods that you've been reading and learning about recently. They are separate from the methods that we've been learning about before, such as experimental research, survey research, correlational research, and so forth. So to make my point, I guess, is that action research could involve survey research, or it could involve experimental research, but it's action in that it's within someone's own situation designed to improve outcomes within their situation. But it could be survey research, it could be correlational research, so it's kind of an overlapping method. In other words, you'd use a different method with that, such as correlational survey or even case study from the qualitative side of things. Mixed methods research is the same. So again, if you choose to do a mixed methods research study, let's say in the future, you're going to go ahead and also choose another method to do that mixed methods research with. And because it's mixed methods, it means that you use both quantitative and qualitative research methods within the same study. So you'll choose a quantitative research method, let's say a survey, and then also a qualitative research method, let's say case study interviews. So that's one thing that you'll think about with those types of research. They're a little bit different. They're not just their own thing. You have to actually pick research methods underneath each one of those. So, okay, well, this week we have chapters 17 and 18. You're going to read on statistics, descriptive and then inferential statistics. There are a lot of deep concepts in these chapters, and so you'll want to pay attention to those. They help you to understand this idea of quantitative data analysis. Basically, what do I do with my data once I've collected my data, if it's a quantitative research study? And what are the ways that we use to analyze this information to determine if our findings are what we thought they would be, or what our findings are? And then the literature review is due this week as well. And this is the final literature review. So for this assignment, I talked about it more next week, but for this assignment, you'll want to take your preliminary lit review that you did, and you're going to expand upon it. And some of you, I gave some ideas of how you could do that, but you're going to add more sources of information and so forth. And I have 15 as the number that you want to make sure that you add in there. But it's not just the number 15, but it's also having a good introduction, body, and summary. Writing flows logically, systematically. Studies categorize logically. And it leads focus toward your planned research study. So again, it goes from general, and then it becomes more and more specific as it goes along, and it should lead right into the study that you're proposing with the assignment that you just submitted. And it's APA formatted narrative writing, and again, as a reminder, that means that you will not include things that refer to yourself like we or I or me or myself. Instead, it's just about what the literature says. So you'll talk about that in your literature review. So that is due this week. The 15 number tells me that it's a more comprehensive review, that you've done a better job of looking at what is in the literature out there before you propose a research study. And that's what good researchers will do. They'll look at all the literature out there already. And then once they have done that, they'll propose a study based on the fact that there's a gap in the literature within the area of that study. And you do a literature review to show the world that you know what you're talking about as far as that area of literature is concerned, that you understand enough to be able to do that study in that area. So that's the final literature review. That's actually the last assignment that you'll have the option to resubmit. The assignments that come after that will not have the option to resubmit. So that's what's coming up this week. You'll need to submit that. There are a couple of examples underneath, final lit review example and literature review, that you can take a look at. Those ones again scored fairly well. So let's see, I'm grading the assignments, and I'm just about done with the design participants procedures assignments. And I've read a lot of nice studies proposed, so good job on those overall. I think that a lot of you are getting the idea that this is a research study that you're proposing, And of course, you don't have to actually complete the research study that you are proposing in that assignment, but you just have to propose a good one. So good job on those so far. One thing I did want to mention though with that is to make sure that you do follow APA document format. And that includes the running head, that includes the page numbers on the right, that includes the titles and headings and double spacing everything and so forth. So if you have questions about that still, you can check out the videos from last week that I talked about making that work for your assignment. And then the final proposal is going to be due next week, and that combines everything that you have completed so far, including the literature review. Well, here's what it includes. It includes the cover page, title, abstract, introduction, methods sections, and data analysis plan sections. So the ones that are in bold here are going to be the new sections that you probably haven't created yet. And the ones that are not in bold are the parts of the study that you probably have already done. So for instance, an introduction, you had to submit that previously, and you talk about your purpose of your research study, a statement of research questions, review of related literature, statement of hypothesis. I think most of you have completed these things, and of course you're doing your lit review this week, so that's what you'll include. And then a methods section in which you will include the participants, instruments, design, and procedures, and that's what you submitted to me last week. So again, those parts are done. You'll want to do the data analysis planned, so your planned data analysis. You'll want to add an abstract if you have not written one up yet. And remember APA document format. I talked about this last week in the videos. It should have its own page for the abstract, its own page for the title page, and on the or cover page, I should say. And on the cover page is your title and your name. And then other elements of APA document format, such as running head and page numbers and so forth. So this is your final proposal, and this is something you'll submit next week, and you will not have the option to resubmit this. It will just receive whatever grade it receives. So be sure to get it right with all the items that you've done, and also make sure that you revise, based on the things that I've given you in the past. That you revise things so that they are revised according to my instructions. And then you'll submit that next week. So this week, the literature review. Next week, the final proposal. So let's talk a little bit about statistics, which is our topic for this week. And I wanted to talk about that, of course, as we get started. So statistics show that people that don't die tend to live longer. That is true. But statistics is really just a set of procedures for describing, analyzing, and interpreting quantitative data. So it's mathematical procedures for describing, analyzing, and interpreting quantitative data. And in your process with your final proposal, you're going to talk about what data analysis method you're going to follow. And you'll want to include descriptive statistics as well as inferential statistics. So as you read, think about what process might your study follow, and this will go into your final proposal that you write up. So usually though, it starts with some kind of preparation. When you're doing a quantitative study, there's a bunch of data that you've collected, but you have to prepare it and get it all lined up and ready so that you can analyze it correctly. So in some cases, you'll have to convert data into numerical systems or categorical organizations. And the data are usually organized by participant. And the word data is always plural. That's kind of a weird thing about academic writing. Anytime you say the word data, it's a plural word. So you say data are instead of data is. But anyway, it's organized by participant, and then you double check it for accuracy. And you also talk about this process a little bit in the research report when you're writing up a research report for publication. But yeah, you convert data into a numerical system. An example of this would be a survey where people might have responded strongly agree, strongly disagree, and so forth. So you might take all of those strongly agrees and change those into the number 5, and strongly disagrees into the number 1, and everything in between into other numbers like 2, 3, and 4. And then you might use that data to analyze it. But it does have to be numerical in order to be able to run some statistics on it, including means and other descriptive statistics. So here's an example of, achievement, gender, grade, achievement, and motivation scores. And notice that each person has each participant in the research study has his or her own line in this spreadsheet here. So you've got line 1, that's participant 1, condition, gender, grade, and achievement and motivation scores for that person. So you usually would do this type of a thing with data. Each person or each participant would have their own row on the spreadsheet, and then each of their scores would be showing up in the different columns on the spreadsheet. So with descriptive statistics then, you would take this data after you've got it together like this, and you would summarize what you found. And so you would talk about things like measures of central tendency, and they represent a typical score, or describe a data set with a single number. So some common measures of central tendency I think you're probably familiar with are mean, median, and mode. So again, you add all those scores up and divide by the number of scores, and this is the mean response. Let's say it was this study here, so the mean achievement or average achievement of students might be somewhere around 83, and average motivation might be somewhere around 63. And so you might talk about that. You might say average motivation scores for students within this study was 63.25, and average achievement was 73.76 or something like that. So you talk about mean. This is descriptive statistics. You're not running any high-level math yet. You're just thinking about the basic overall view of the data. There are also measures of variability which you might report as well. This indicates the spread in a distribution of scores, or at least it tells you, let's say you have a mean of 73.5, it tells you how far the scores go up from that and how far the scores go down from that. Were most of the scores very close to that score, or were they very far away, even though that's the mean either way, that's the same mean, but the scores could be very far away from that overall or very close to that, and that's a measure of variability. So you could talk about the range, the quartile deviation, the variance, and the standard deviation. These are ways to describe the data, again, in a descriptive way. The most common one, though, is standard deviation, which is the square root of variance, which is how far on average each score is from the mean. So again, it's telling you how far spread away from the mean are the scores. Are they far away from that main mean, or are they all pretty close to that area? And that can tell you a little bit something more about your study. For instance, you might say that student achievement was very much the same for all students, and that might be significant to your study because that's what you maybe wanted to have, is that all students were achieving about the same. Or maybe you wanted to have them very variable and so forth. So that's a way to describe statistics as well. So with descriptive statistics, you usually have some measure of central tendency, and the mean is preferred, and some measure of variability, and usually the standard deviation is preferred to share how variable the scores are. Now with inferential statistics, it's a little bit different. You're not just describing it, but you're actually crunching the numbers now to go in depth about how the population is different from the sample that you took. It's basically, well, here's the definition: data analysis techniques to determine how likely results obtained from a sample are the same results that would be obtained from the entire population. So again, a research study always has to have a sample. You probably can't collect data from every person in the world that it would apply to. And so you have to do some statistics to try to figure out whether that sample was, would be the same if it was obtained from the entire population. So that's what the idea with inferential statistics is trying to figure out, are my results the same as probably, or how likely are my results the same as a population would be. And also you run statistics to determine differences between means as well, like if one group is different than another, and how does that relate to the entire population, or how likely is a sample difference the same as a population difference. So it's kind of interesting to think about. And here's just an example of a picture, with population and sample. So again, your sample for your study is not going to be the entire population. Let's say your study is 4th grade achievement based on a special teaching technique. You can't choose every fourth grader in the entire world or in the entire US even, or probably not even in the entire state. But you can choose a smaller sample and then you can run statistics, and those will tell you how likely the results that you got would happen also in the population. Or in other words, can I do this study again, and how likely am I to get the same results in another group of fourth graders somewhere else? Or in other words, should I recommend this method to other teachers? And statistics can help you to see that. So inferential statistics, they're about, can I generalize my findings to a population, and what's the probability of the same findings if someone were to conduct this study, or if a teacher were to use this same method, would it result in the same things in a different group of people? And then you'll read about hypotheses as well. There are different hypotheses that you might have. There's a null hypothesis, which is there is no difference between the groups. There's a research hypothesis, which is basically usually there is a difference between the groups. And if there is a difference, we reject the null hypothesis. And then you have a test of significance. And those are the statistical tests we're talking about. It's basically saying, are differences between the groups due to chance or due to the intervention? So we're going back to this whole idea of population versus sample and so forth. So you'll also read about this concept of alpha, and researchers usually choose an alpha of 0.05, and that basically means that only 5 out of 100 chances that the observed difference occurred by chance. So you do a study, you complete a study, you find statistically that there's an alpha of smaller than 0.05, then that means that only 5 out of 100 chances that the observed difference occurred by chance. And that means that 95 out of 100 chances or more that the observed difference occurred because of the treatment that you implemented. So for instance, let's say you do a research study and you have two different conditions. One condition, students receive reading instruction, like maybe a new cool method of reading instruction, and the other condition, they are receiving reading instruction that is the older way. And you compare the two and you find that, hey, students in the new cool reading instruction group did get better scores than students in the the traditional reading group. And so if your alpha is 0.05, then you say, well, that means that there's a 95% chance that these differences occurred because of the new cool reading intervention and not just by chance. So you can say, I reject the null hypothesis that the groups are the same, and I say that the groups are different. There's a lot of math involved in this. I don't expect you probably to understand all of the intricacies of statistics, especially in 1 week of class. Something that you should think about is that I took probably 3 or 4 statistics classes, so full semester classes on just this concept of inferential statistics and the different formulas and the different ways of thinking that surround them. And so obviously within a graduate research and design class on the master's level with only 1 week, and I think in my face-to-face class just 2 weeks, or regular class just 2 weeks on statistics, it's pretty hard to cover all of the different things that one can cover in this. What you do want to come away with is just an idea of some of these basic concepts, and then think about for your study what might be a method that you could use to, what might be your null hypothesis, what might be your research hypothesis, and then what method of inferential statistics might you use to determine if there are differences between the groups, and are those differences by chance or are they because of the intervention? So let's see, we got that one already. And then you have different errors that you'll read about too. You have type 1 errors and type 2 errors and so forth. Those are good to know about, but again, probably not important for your proposal necessarily. But a couple of things to talk about are just the different tests you might run. So you're going to run some different tests using some statistics. And again, how to perform these is is something that maybe you won't know for the rest of this class just from 1 week in the class, but which one to run is the question that you'll want to answer for your study. So these are used to determine whether scores are statistically significantly different or not. And so there are parametric tests like t-tests and ANOVA, and non-parametric like chi-square. And I think for most of your studies, you're going to be thinking about either a t-test or an ANOVA test. And what you'll do is you'll use a t-test to determine, I'm going to move on here, you'll use a t-test to determine just differences between two groups. So if your study only has two groups or two conditions, a control and treatment condition, or maybe parents versus teachers, or something like that, then you'll probably want to use a t-test. And that will tell you just the difference between two groups and whether those differences are likely to be by chance or actually because of the way people think or the condition that you implemented in your study. And if you have more than two groups, you'll probably want to use ANOVA, or analysis of variance. And this is a statistical technique that you can use. Let's say you have a control and a treatment 1 group and a treatment 2 group. That means 3 groups. You're going to have to use ANOVA to analyze those. There are many other statistical tests out there, but these are the two that you'll probably choose from if you're doing a quantitative study. And so again, you'll use a t-test to determine the differences between just two groups, and ANOVA if you have more than two groups. So that is a very, very short primer on statistics, but you'll read more this week in the readings and hopefully gain a greater understanding of this amazing world of statistical information. I think that's about it for this week, so have a great week.